Okay, guys. Please let me know if my Wi-Fi or if my audio is clear. I can't test myself right now. I still haven't gotten to either a Wi-Fi antenna or an Ethernet cable routed down here. Also, I'm just hosting hosting and sending. Let's see, and just two more places. And last place for Twitter. And we are live. Okay then. And we got our first viewer. Oh, ow. Well, I am going to presume. Well, actually, I think I can. Let's see if I can test this without too much issue. I'm gonna try getting on here. Actually, I think I can. Okay, yeah, it works. It works fine. So, well, since no one is here, I guess I shall record this for posterity. So I shall start with putting John Milton's work into context, both in the near context, but the um, also the context of whole literature that he was writing in, namely that of the epic poem. Um, the epic poem is, and if we're going to, and if traffic doesn't pick, oh, we got two people. Um, hello, chat. I'm going to be reading once I get to reading book one from that PDF that was included in my Telegram chat or my Telegram channel. Anyway, the or epic poetry, there's narrow and thin definitions for what epic poetry is. The narrow definitions will focus on things like does it start in media res, for example? Is it a supernatural poem? Or is it a poem about supernatural events and heroes and such? And other ones might even focus on line count. But I think, broadly speaking, while they are correct in terms of it must be significant length, I think that one of the things that are partially missing with a lot of definitions is the response of the reader. Because when you read the canonical works of poetry, for example, of epic poetry, they're even to our modern ears. Oh, thank you, Vingul. So even to our modern ears, we have this response of wonderment, you know. And so with Milton, I would argue ultimately, and this is slightly stepping outside of the academic context when I'm saying this, I would argue Milton is, in a very real sense, the first modern poet. Not modernist, which is a very different thing. That would be like T.S. Eliot, but rather in terms of what he's announcing, very near to his contemporary Descartes, is a fundamental shift in how we view the world and how we see and how we essentially use and view poetry. Because even though there is a strongly religious, it's a very religious book, at the same time, Milton in his very career, and hope this will kind of be a thing of encouragement for guys like us who've who may have had some struggles in our younger years, dealing with the black pill and such. Um, he himself, at a very young age, thought himself to be a great poet. We can track from his letters and such, and his own writings that he already thought of it, and yet he wasn't a terribly prodigious writer of poetry. Um, he was skilled, but he wasn't like Goethe or what's his name? Why am I blanking on him? Um, he wasn't like Goethe or or what was that British poet that was considered to be the first rock star, very famous but died young. Let me quickly Google. It was Lord Reek War. No, it wasn't Shakespeare. Chaucer. Byron. Byron. So Lord Byron, for example, was a poetic prodigy. He just produced large and large amounts of poetry, satirical, saucy verse, and whatnot. And that brought him a ton of fame, and hence his appellation of being the first rock star in a sense, um, along with his, non-poetic antics. Um, but in the case of Milton, he was a bit of an outsider student. He didn't really like uh, the academic flavor of his school, where they had didactic debates in Latin and things like that. And so on top of that, he was a touch of a weirdo. He was a bit of a weirdo. He was known to be like this very handsome youth. At the same time, he was kind of soft. So he got the nickname the Lady of Christ Church or of Christ College. Yeah, he died in the Greek War for Independence. Um, Byron did, but and yet he was by no means a beard or a guy seeking a beard because he married 3 times when he didn't need to. Um, and he had kids with 2 of them. So it's like, yeah, he's just one of those guys that in college that's a touch weird, but not actually gay or anything like that. Um, and so in the very introduction of Homer, or of in the very introduction to Paradise Lost, we see that the very spirit of the Enlightenment manifests itself because previously unrhymed verse, you know, blank some verse was not used in regular poetry. It was used in as a poetic device for plays, but it was not used in regular verse or regular poetry. And so he amends a little prolegomena before the play, or before he begins the verse or the poem, sorry, and it reads on what it should be page 46 on the PDF. The measure in English heroic verse without rhyme, as that of Homer in Greek and Virgil in Latin, rhyme being no necessary adjunct or true ornament of poem or good verse, in longer words especially, but the invention of a barbarous age to set off wretched matter and lame metre, graced indeed, since by the use of some famous modern poets, carried away by custom, but much to their own vexation, hindrance, and constant constraint to express many things otherwise, and for the most part worse than else they would have expressed them. Not without cause, therefore, some both Italian and Spanish poets of prime note have rejected rhyme both in shorter and longer works, and have long since our best English tragedies, as things of itself, to all judicious ears, and non-trivial and no true musical delight, which consists onely in apt numbers, fit quantity of syllables, and the sense variously drawn out from one verse into another, not in the jingling sounds of like endings, a fault avoided by the learned ancients, both in poetry and all good oratory. This neglected then of rhyme so little is to be taken for a defect, though it may seem so perhaps to vulgar readers, that it rather is to be esteemed as an example set, the first in English of ancient liberty recovered to heroic poem from the troublesome and modern bondage of rhyming. And this is a very and this is very distinctly, you know, typical of it's very typical of the Enlightenment, where essentially they wanted to cast off, in a certain sense, what they viewed as their modern problems or their modern prejudices to recover what was of the ancients. And so, in a very real sense, he was doing the OG return to tradition, um, in terms of poetry, and that's kind of the setup for um, that he gives before he even actually introduces it. Because in each book, he also very helpfully provides an argument, or what is kind of like a little bit of a prose summation of the poetry that's a bit clearer for his readers, so that they know exactly what's going on, and can follow and not have to be caught tripping up parsing all the ways that he um, talks about things in ways that are decorative. Just a little note for people before I begin to read once I get into the poetry. This is an iambic pentameter, so it is usually uh, a line each of 5 what are called feet. So a foot is a unit of poetry, and that is, in this case, usually it's either 2 or 3 syllables. In this case, an iambic is the most common. It's what you hear in Shakespeare, mostly, where you start with an unstressed syllable and with a stressed ba-da, 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 into a line. And a lot of poetry that we typically think of in like grade school or in song, for various reasons, you want to have the home poetry. I forget the technical term off the top of my head right now. You want to essentially have an entire syntactical unit to a line. So in that case, you would want to either have a comma or a hyphen or something that gives a natural longer pause uh, into the line that allows for a very, very regular flow. However, Milton does not do this. Milton allows for his poetry to what is called enjambed. So it it breaks up the syntactical flow according to the line to further kind of subdue the rhythm and to prevent it from becoming too sing-songy. About 3 out of every 5 lines are enjambed. Okay, Vingul, good having you here. And so that is that's kind of like a very basic thing, and I may with play with it according to dramatic reading. I didn't do a huge amount of you know playing around with the lines myself. I've read them beforehand, and I've taken notes and such. Um, but so it's not gonna be super super interesting in terms of like where I can play up the dramatic reading of it. I will next week, especially because book 2 begins to get very interesting, because then it's actually kind of like it's where Satan actually where they actually debate all the what they should actually do in terms of a plan, and so that becomes a lot of very interesting dialogue there. Here it's more about like there it's more about like reminiscent, back talking about what's happening. So anyway, I will get to the argument, and this is on page 47. This this book proposes first in brief the whole subject, man's disobedience and the loss thereupon of paradise wherein he was placed. Then touches the prime cause of his fall, the serpent, or rather Satan in the serpent, who, revolting from God and drawing onto his side many legions of angels, was by the command of God driven out of heaven, with all his crew into the deep, into the great deep. Which action passed over, the poem hast into the midst of things, presenting Satan with his angels now fallen into hell, described here, not in the center, for heaven and earth may be supposed as yet not made, certainly not yet accursed, but in a place of utter darkness, filthiest called chaos. Here Satan with his angels, lying on the burning lake, thunderstruck and astonished, after a certain space recovers from all as from confusion, calls him who the next in order and dignity lay by him. They confer of their miserable fall. Satan awakens all his legions, who lay till then in the same manner confounded. They rise, their numbers array of battle, their chief leaders named, according to the idols known afterwards in Canaan and the countries adjoining. To these Satan directs his speech, comforts them with hope yet of regaining heaven, but tells them lastly of a new world and a new kind of creature to be created, according to an ancient prophecy or report in heaven, for that angels were long before this visible creation, was the opinion of many ancient fathers. To find out the truth of this prophecy and to determine thereon, he refers to a full council. What his associates thence attempt, pandemonium, the palace of Satan arises, suddenly built out of the deep. The infernal peers the air sit in council of man's first disobedience, and the fruit of that forbidden tree whose mortal taste brought death into the world and all our woe. With loss of Eden, till one greater man restore us and regain the blissful seat. Sing, heavenly muse, on the secret top of Oreb or of Sinai didst inspire that shepherd who first taught the chosen seed in the beginning how the heavens and earth arose out of chaos, or if Sion hill delight thee more than Siloa's brook that flowed fast by the oracle of God. I thence invoke thy aid to my adventurous song, that with no middle flight intends to soar above the Ionian mountain, while it pursues things unattempted yet in prose or rhyme. And chiefly thou, O Spirit, that dost prefer before all temples the upright and pure, heart and pure, instruct me, for thou know'st that all from the first wast present, and with mighty wings outspread, dove-like sats brooding on the vast abyss, and madest it pregnant. What in me is dark illumine, what is the low raise and support? To that to the height of this great argument, I may assert eternal providence and justify the ways of God to men. So that's line 26. I'm going to pause right there and touch upon a few things real quick. The what is it? One thing I forgot to mention that is very, very typical as a poetic device for epic poetry is an invocation to God or the gods for aid. You see this in Homer. You see this in Virgil. You see this in Dante. You even see it in more satirical, less serious epics that are more romances, where it'll open with like, "In the beginning was the Word, and the Word was God, and the Word was with God." In my opinion, it's like this very loose thing. But whereas in the case of this, you see Milton very sincerely, basically give almost like an equivalent to the proto-evangelion, um, evangelion, where in the very beginning point of Genesis, uh, where Eve, it gives like a foreshadowing of this almost, where Eve, you know, uh, is prophesied to produce a line that will eventually crush the head of the serpent. And here he's already saying that shepherd who first taught the chosen seed, um, right there. Um, and then we see also him referencing the very beginning of how God essentially, in a very, very provocative manner, compares him to a dove and who hovers over the abyss and mates it pregnant. And then, ultimately, at the very conclusion of this uh, introduction, that is ultimately his goal. As from his background as a Puritan, we don't know exactly what his true views were because it looks like he may have been a apostate of a certain kind, but only God ultimately knows what his true views are. And so we shall move on from line 27, page 48. Say first, for heaven hides nothing from thy view, nor the deep tract of hell. Say first, what cause moved our grandparents in that happy state, favored of heaven so highly to fall off from their Creator and transgressed his will, or one restraint, lords of the world besides. Who first seduced them to that foul revolt? The eternal serpent. When he it was whose guile stirred up with envy and revenge, and deceived the mother of mankind. What time his pride had cast him out of home from heaven with all his host of rebel angels, by whose aid aspiring to set himself in glory above his peers, he trusted to have equaled the Most High, if he opposed and with ambitious aim against the throne and monarchy of God, raised impious war in heaven, and battle proud, in a vain attempt, him, the almighty power, hurled headlong flaming from the ethereal sky, with boisterous ruin and combustion down to the bottomless perdition, there to dwell in adamantine chains and penal fire, who durst defy the omnipotent to arms, 9 times the space that measures day and night. To mortal men, he with his horrid crew lay vanquished, rolling in the fiery gulf, confounded though immortal, but his doom reserved him to more wrath, for now the thought both of lost happiness and lasting pain torments him. Round he throws his baleful eyes, that witnessed a huge affliction and dismay, mixed with obdurate pride and steadfast hate, at once, as far as angels can, he views the dismal situation waste and wild, a dungeon, horrible, on all sides round, as one great furnace flamed, yet from those flames no light, but rather darkness visible, served only to discover sights of woe, regions of sorrowful, doleful shades where peace and rest can never dwell, hope never comes to all, but torture without end, still urges and a fiery deluge fed with ever burning sulphur unconsumed. Such place eternal justice had prepared for those rebellious, here their prison ordained, in utter darkness, and their portion set, as far removed from God and light of heaven, as from the centre thrice unto the utmost pole. Oh, how unlike the place from whence they fell! There the companions of his fall, overwhelmed with floods and with whirlwinds of tempestuous fire, he soon discerns, and weltering by his side, one next to himself in power and next in crime, long after known in Palestine and named Beelzebub, to whom the arch enemy, and thence in heaven called Satan, with bold words breaking the horrid silence, thus began. Okay, so that's another good spot to briefly stop and comment comment upon at was it line 84, page 50. So here we see the scene where essentially is the setup where uh, Milton has constructed for us this very vivid picture of fire with darkness, which is very terrifying when you think about it, because we so strongly associate darkness or fire with the ability to at least produce light, and yet, so, apologies, my headset went off for some reason. Um, anyway, the and so he produces this very powerful imagery uh, about essentially this perpetual pain that essentially is, well, imprisoning you by your very senses almost. Um, talking about the bottomless perdition and adamant chains and penal fire. So so now we begin to go to the section where we see all the various demons and false gods that Milton referred to in dialogue. At line 84, and I believe it's Satan. Yeah, so Satan opens up with this. If thou behest he, oh how fallen, how changed from him who, in the happy realms of light clothed with transcendent brightness, didst outshine, myriads though bright, if he whom mutual league, united thoughts and counsels, equal hope, and hazard and hazard in the glorious enterprise, joined with me once, now misery hath joined in equal ruin. Into what pit thou seest, from what height fallen, so much the stronger proved. He with his thunder, until then who knew the force of those dire arms, yet yet not for those, nor what the potent victor in his rage can else inflict. Do I repent or change? Though changed in outward lustre, that fixed mind and high disdained in sense of injured merit, that with the mightiest raised me to contend, and to the fierce contention brought along innumerable force of spirits armed that durst dislike his reign, and me preferring his utmost power with adverse power opposed, in dubious battle on the plains of heaven, and shook his throne. What though the field be lost? All is not lost. The unconquerable will, and the study of revenge, immortal hate, and courage never to submit or yield. And what is else not to be overcome? That glory never shall his wrath or might extort from me. To bow and sue for grace with suppliant, supplement, sorry, with supplant knee, and defy his power, from whom the terror of this arm so late doubted his empire, that were low indeed, that were an ignominy and shame beneath this downfall, since by fate the strength of gods and this imperial substance cannot fail, since though through experience of this great event, in arms not worse, in foresight not much advanced, in foresight much advanced, we may be, we may with more successful hope resolve to wage by force or guile internal war, irreconcilable to our grand foe, who now triumphs, and in the excess of joy soul reigning holds the tyranny of heaven. So spake the apostate angel, though in pain, vaunting aloud, but racked with deep despair. And thus him answered soon his bold compeer, comrade, compeer, O Prince, O Chief of many throned powers. That, in this case, it would be, what was that? Who was that exactly? Beelzebub. So Beelzebub responds with, O Prince, O Chief of many throned powers, that led the embattled seraphim to war under thy conduct, and in dreadful deeds, fearless, endangered heaven's perpetual king, and put proof to his high supremacy, whether upheld by chance or fate, too well I see, and rue the dire event, that with sad overthrow and foul defeat hath lost us heaven, and all this mighty host, in horrible destruction laid thus low, as far as God's heavenly essences can perish, for the mind and spirit remain invincible, and vigor soon returns. Though all our glory extinct, and happy state here swallowed up endless misery, in endless misery. But what if he, our conqueror, whom I now all force believe almighty, since no less, then could have overpowered such force as ours, have left us to our this our spe- have left us this our spirit and strength entire, strongly to suffer and support our pains, that we may so suffice his vengeful ire, or do him a mightier service, as his thralls, by right of war, whate'er his business be, here in the heart of hell to work and fire, or to do his errands in the gloomy deep. What can it then avail, though yet we feel strength undiminished, or eternal being, to undergo eternal punishment? Whereunto the speedy words the archfiend replied, Satan, fall in, cherubim, to be weak is miserable, doing or suffering, suffering, but of this to be sure, or this be sure, to do aught good never will be our task, but ever to do ill our sole delight, of being the contrary to his high will, whom we resist. If then his providence out of our evil seek to bring forth good, our labor must be to pervert that end, and out of good still to find means of evil, which oft times they succeed, as so as perhaps shall grieve him, if I fail not, and disturb his inmost counsels from their destined aim. But see, the angry victor hath recalled his ministers of vengeance and pursuit back to the gates of heaven. The sulphurous hail shot us shot after us in storm o'erblown, hath laid the fiery surge that from the precipice of heaven received us failing or falling, and the thunder winged with red lightning in impetuous rage, perhaps hath spent his shafts, and ceases now to bellow through the vast boundless deep. Let us not slip the occasion, whether scorn or satiate fury, yield it from our foe. Seest thou yon dreary plain, forlorn and wild, the seat of desolation, void of light, save what the glimpse of these livid flames cast pale and delightful? Thither let us tend from the tossing of these fiery waves. There rest, if any rest can harbor there, and reassembling our afflicted powers, consult how we may henceforth most offended our enemy, offend our enemy, and our own loss how repair, how overcome this desire calamity, what reinforcement we may gain from hope, if not what resolution from despair. So I think that's another good spot to, well, guess no one's, guess no one who's listening, at least live. Let's see. Okay, so this section, this back and forth, is very interesting. Um, Namely because you essentially see Satan begin to cast doubt in order to rally his troops. You see, let's go back. Oh, where did we stop? Okay, we're stopping at 190, 193. Um, so yeah, if you go all the way back over to here, you see Satan basically cast doubt upon the fact that God's actual power, because in essence he had to intervene in order to help. Um, you see you see it right here. Where I may this is what I get for forgetting to forgetting to go through analog notes. Um, oh yeah, here it is. Ah, there it is. Okay. So yeah, you see right here with several doubts in dubious battle of the plains of heaven. So in of uncertain outcome, and shook his throne. What though the field be lost? All is not lost. The unconquerable will, and the study of revenge, immortal hate, encouraged and ever submit or yield. Like this is him essentially just pointing out that we almost got there. You know, we shook the throne. He's giving his rallying speech and essentially saying, like what are you going to do? There, there were an ignominy and shame beneath this downfall, since by fate the strength of gods and this imperial substance cannot fail. They're always going to be here. They're not going to die. Um, in arms not worst, in much foresight, much advanced, we may with more successful hope resolve to wage by force or guile eternal war. So yeah, that was basically the back and forth. And you see Satan essentially build up, and let's go back to this. What reinforcement we gain from hope, if not what resolution from despair. And you see Satan essentially already begin to craft a plan. He's saying, like, let's build a home here, essentially. Um, let's build a place where we can dwell. The seed of desolation, void of light. Save what from on the glimmering of these livid flames cast pale. And so does anyone come back? Ah, okay. Oh, okay, no one's come back. Well, I guess I shall continue reading, and if I don't get, I'm gonna probably cut this a bit early tonight, and then at what is it, in 20 minutes, I gotta see some family off and whatnot. But but yeah, I think at the very least, getting some good audio for this will do as well. Um, okay. Thus Satan talking to his nearest mate, with head lift with head uplift above the wave, and eyes that sparkled blaze, his other parts besides, prone on the flood, extended long and large, lay floating, many a rood, in bulk, as huge as whom the fables name of monstrous size, Titanian or earthborn, that warred on Jove. Barytos or Typhon, whom the den by ancient Tarsus held, or that sea beast Leviathan, which god of all his works created hugest that swims ocean stream, him haply slumbering on the Norway foam. the pilot of some small night-foundered skiff, steaming some island off, as seamen tell, with fixed anchor on his scaly rind moor by his side under the lee, with night invests of the sea, and wished morn delays, so stretched out huge in length, and the arch-fiend lay chained on the burning lake, nor ever thence had risen or heaved his head, but that the will and high permission of all ruling heaven left him at charge to his own dark designs, that with reiterated crimes he might heap on himself damnation, while he sought evil to others, and enraged might see how his malice served to bring forth infinite goodness, grace, and mercy shewn on man by him seduced, but on himself treble confusion, wrath, and vengeance poured. Forthright he rears from the pool his mighty stature, on each hand the flames, driven downward, their pointing spires rolled in billows, leave mist a horrid veil. Then, with expanding wings, he steers his flight aloft, incumbent on the dusky air, that felt unusual weight, till on dry land, his lights, if it were on land, that ever burned, with solid, as if the lake with liquid fire, and that such he appeared in hue, as with when the force of subterranean wind transports a hill torn from Pelorus, or on the shattered side of thundering Etna, whose combustible and fueled entrails thence conceiving fire, sublimed with mineral fury, aid the winds, and leave a singed bottom, all involved with stench and smoke, such resting found at the soul of unblessed feet, him next to his mate, both glorying to have scrapped the Stygian flood as gods, and by their recovered strength, not by the sufferance of supernatural power. So that's a very interesting uh, digression, I think. That I definitely noted that when I read this the first time, that how much he gives essentially to Leviathan out of all the other ones. Like you got Tarsus or the sea beast Leviathan, and then he goes on talking about essentially talking about like how crazy this whole beast is. Like there probably is there's probably a term for this, but it's like a showpiece monster almost that he gives us out of all the other demons. He kind of like he moves along talking about it. He will go into more detail with Satan later on, but with this, he goes into such detail about the particular little things about him, like talking about how he comes out of the fiery lake and such. It's so it's so that's sorry. It's kind of hard to describe just how wonderful these words all go together. Um, his mighty stature on each hand, the flames, driven backward, slope their pointing spires, and rolled in billows, leave in the mist a horrid veil. Like this, like that image of him just getting out, of him getting out of the fiery lake. Like that's just incredible. The solid as a lake with liquid fire. Torn. It, I'm just, I'm just now gawking at Milton's words. Let's continue a little bit more, and then I may close up with a little thing. What is this? We'll start at 235 again. We'll get a running start into the next section. Sublimed with mineral fury, aid the winds, and leave the singed bottom all involved with stench and smoke. Such resting found the soul of unblessed feet. Such resting found the soul of unblessed feet. Him followed his next mate, both glorying have escaped the Stygian flood as gods, and by their own recovered strength, not by the sufferance of supernatural power. In this is this the region, this soil, the clime? Said then the lost archangel, this the seat that we must change, and this is Satan once again talking, that we must change for heaven, this mournful gloom, for that celestial light? Be it so, since he who now is sovereign can dispose and bid of what shall be right. Far I do not know why my why this keeps turning off. It shouldn't be because I'm talking, but sorry about that. So anyway, back to this. Who is now sovereign can dispose 246 and bid what shall be right. Farthest from him is best, whom reason hath equalled, force hath made supreme. Above his equals, farewell, happy fields, where joy forever dwells. Hail horrors, hail infernal world, and thou profoundest hell. Receive thy new possessor, one who brings a mind not to be changed by place or time. The mind is its own place, and in itself can make a heaven of hell and a hell of heaven. What matter where, if I still be the same? If I be still the same, and what should I be? All but less than he whom thunder hath made greater. Here, here at least we shall be free. The Almighty hath not built here for his envy, will not drive us hence. We may reign secure, and in my choice to reign is worthy ambition, though in hell. And the infamous line, better to reign in hell than serve in heaven. But wherefore let we then our faithful friends, the associates and co-partners of our loss, lie thus astonished on the oblivious pool, and call them not to share with us their part in this unhappy mansion, or once more with rallied arms to try what may be yet regained in heaven, or what more lost in hell. So it looks like let's check on the stream on chat. Oh, still no one. Well, I guess I'll end a bit early on the I guess I'll end a bit early on the kind of talking about the verisimilitude, because if you're listening to this and reading along this in the future, you may kind of notice how charismatic Satan is. And in fact, this is kind of this essentially is the first time we really see Satan portrayed in a very human-like manner. Again, this is one of those revolutionary things about Milton, where he essentially, he makes a radical break from the previous European traditions of Satan is kind of like this creature that happens to be like intelligent in some manner, but he's much more of a, he's a fiend. Um, think Dante. Um, but he goes for the very opposite tact, and something that he admits when he says opens like this has never been tried in rhyme or prose. This isn't really even quite frankly done in scripture in terms of verisimilitude of giving us a good character picture or anything like that of Satan. Um, we do know that he's crafty. He's described as that as crafty. He's described, we know he can in some respect talk, depending on how you interpret that particular Old Testament passage. about the Lucifer, the Morning Star. Um, and we know he was able to, deceive Eve. And so in that respect, he was, a talker. He opened up with, did God really say, and whatnot. But in this case, however, he Milton takes everything and turns it up to 11, and also he does take certain liberties that you might find interesting in how he describes like the metaphysics of angels and such, which uh, will be very interesting to get into. Um, he's oh, I think this may be the cutoff point. Um, just gonna just gonna meet. No, no, we're good. Um, where was I? Oh yes. So in terms of what Milton is attempting to do here with his characterization of Satan, as well as Adam and Eve, to a very important degree, he really attempts to create essentially a foil of the human psyche. Um, in some respects, one could read into that a projection of Milton's conception of politics and such. I know for a fact that Pullman, for example, Philip Pullman, did that in his famous was it uh his Dark Materials. You'll see a reference to that later because that itself is a reference. His Dark Materials trilogy, where he essentially tries to say the fall was a good thing because, well, you lost your innocence and therefore you gained wisdom, which is extraordinarily subversive. Which there, if you remember the movie Race for the Golden Compass, that was based off of that. The idea that essentially kids growing up and losing their innocence is a good thing. Um, and so, in there have been questions, and this will be forever debated by scholars, on whether or not Milton is is sympathetic to the devil, or whether or not he's ultimately in God's camp in this respect. It doesn't help the fact that we're pretty sure that a he was a Socinian or something like that. I forget his exact views, but he wasn't a proper Trinitarian. I believe he held to some version of adoptionism, and and so consequently, that's going to add even more fuel to whatever your particular read of Milton's Paradise Lost is. Um, ultimately, reading through it, I don't think that Milton is of the non-devil's camp. I can't exactly put my finger on it. Maybe maybe as I continue this series reading through it, um, as I continue reading through it, will I'll be able to point to an exact passage that connects. But anyway, it appears my sorry, but guys, but it appears my family is about to depart, and so I'll have to end this broadcast a touch early. I guess I'll have to make it a mega thread or something like that. Maybe I'll try to rope in a buddy to read and react and talk about it, so that it's not me putting together my notes. Anyway, for all those listening and listening in the future, good evening, good morning, good day, and good night.